Okay, let's look at this. So I've got up on the screen in between Rick and I have up the Hebrew for Genesis 1:1, and below it is the English translation. I don't know how well you can see that. I hope you can see it well. In Hebrew, you read from right to left. It says, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'haaretz. And what's going on here is let's just take this word by word real quick. Bereshit does not mean in the beginning. That's the first thing that I wanted to cover last week. There are several possible meanings of the word. If you want to say in the beginning, you would say Bereshonah. Both of them share the same root, Rosh, which means like head or right or beginning. But Reshit and Roshana are two different words. So at the very beginning, there's one thing that we need to clarify, and that is that we're probably not dealing with things in a chronological order here. And this becomes important later on when we get to day 1 of creation, where he creates light and he says evening and morning one day.
Just to be a pain.
Go ahead.
And, I'm noticing underneath the verse 1 it says when God began to create, as an English translation of that. Could that be referring to a sort of in the beginning, or am I?
Well, it's not that we're not talking about a beginning.
Literal?
It's not that we're not talking about a beginning. We're just not talking about a chronological beginning here. We're not talking about, you don't read Genesis chapter 1 and say, well, this is saying first God did this and then that. And that. He kind of did, but he kind of didn't. And that's what I was going to with the time thing. We don't know what God did. We don't know what the first thing God did. All we know is that in the beginning of something, God created the heavens and the earth. That's about the best that we can say. That translation, when God began, sounds like it's going according to Rashi's translation of it. And this is an important thing for you to know, is that every translation is a commentary, and every translation is the opinion of the translator. So anything that you read from any English of any book, whatever language it was originally written in, when you get it translated into your language, you're getting the opinion of someone else.
That probably goes for any book, whether it's Torah, Bible.
Sure.
It could be even some sci-fi novel.
Well, even one of my favorite Hebrew movies, Ushpizin, right? They keep calling the main character like Rabbi in the English translation of it. They keep calling him Rabbi Moshe, but he wasn't a rabbi. They use a term called Reb. Reb is just an honorific you usually say to someone who's older. It doesn't mean rabbi. It means they have like a Reb, it means they have like a lot of wisdom because of their age. Just keep in mind that translation is the opinion of someone else about what the text means. Ultimately, if you want to know what the text means, you have to learn the language and figure it out for yourself. Otherwise, you can stay here, and we'll go through the text the best we can and explain it to you. Bereshit means in the beginning of something. The Rambam, who is a Jewish philosopher and legalist, says it's the first principle. So, without getting too complicated, let's just agree. Bereshit is a very strange thing to begin the Torah with because it doesn't really mean what we expect it to mean. So the next word, bara, is important. And this is going to be important as we go through chapter 1 and chapter 2 of Genesis, because there are a lot of words in English that we're being told where it says God made something. You should know each of those words has a slightly different meaning from one another. Bara here in Genesis 1:1 actually means to create from nothing. And it appears a couple of other times. It appears with the fish and it appears with human beings. God uses bara, but the commentators say that really it's just referring back to the initial bara, the creation from nothing. And then when God created from nothing, he created two things, the heaven and the earth, whatever those are, and everything, and that was just the potential of the universe.
Yeah, I remember how the land creatures were made out of the ground, so that material, sky creatures, birds and all that were created out of the air, so that whatever air is, and the aquatic creatures out of the water. So out of created from water. So, yeah.
And those terms for creation that you're referring to are usually asa and yotzer, which mean like to make something from something else. But when you come to creating from nothing, it's only here in Genesis 1:1 where the meaning of bara. Elohim is the name for God that is used throughout chapter 1. You'll never find his unique four-letter name. The problem is that if you're a strict monotheist like me, then it would seem like it's problematic to have God's name have a plural ending. The yud and the mem at the end of the word Elohim it can mean plurality. If you had yud and mem at the end of, like, for example, anashim. Anashim means like men, right? Nashim is women. So those are plurals. But we also find out that with this word Elohim, that it also can refer to an individual. And we saw this with Moses in Exodus 7:1, where he says, "You will be an Elohim to Paro."
Yeah, you were saying last week the difference between Elohim and Elohim and the relation, I remember.
Well, Elohim, basically I say Elohim because we're supposed to be very careful about how we say God's name. So I changed the H into a K sound. But it's the same. It's the same word. But
I'm just saying for anybody out there listening.
Right.
I'm trying to, since they didn't get last week, maybe insert a little bit of last week here and there.
No, that's good. Yeah, because I'm sort of trying to breakneck through it, and I need to slow down every now and then so we can go back and fill in some missing gaps. Because in my mind, I've already explained all this stuff, so you get to bring me back and go, no, let's talk about this again. So anyway, so Elohim here, how do we know when Elohim is being used as a singular or a plural? Well, we look at its verb. If the verb is plural, then Elohim is used as a plural. If it's singular, then it's used as a singular. The verb here, bara, it means he created. It's a past tense singular. So that tells us that Elohim here is being used as a singular as well.
Just for all of us non-Hebrew reading people, which of these words, I guess, would be bara? Like
second word from the right.
We're reading from right to left. So it would be the second one you said? Second
word from the right, yep. Number in Hebrew is singular, and the default tense is past tense. And so here it's he created, bara. And so in the beginning, or in the beginning of, or when God began creating, he created the heavens and the earth. And if you look at the fourth word there, you have an aleph and a tav. We have direct objects in sentences. So for example, Tom kicked the ball. Tom is the subject, kick is the verb, and ball is direct object, because the direct object is what the verb's action is the subject of the verb's action. So here the et in Hebrew oftentimes tells us what the direct objects are of the sentence. So the thing that is created here is et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. God created the heavens and he created the earth. And we know that because you have the et there. But et also has another meaning that we can use. And it can also mean that like with something or along with. And so here we have et hashemayim means the heavens and all their things, and the earth and all their things. And what are the things that we're talking about? Well, we're talking about, for the heavens, we're talking like the sun and the moon and the stars, those things that are in the heavenly sphere. And the earth, we're talking about the ground and the water and the animals and birds and all that, everything in the earthly sphere. So that wants to let us know that at this moment of creation, we don't know what happened before, but we know when God created the heavens and the earth, he created the heavens and the earth and everything that God was going to use on the subsequent days to create everything. So
cool. Oh, and I was just going to mention again, referring to last week, you talked about in Hebrew, in Jewish culture, there's 4 ways of interpreting the text.
Yeah.
Or maybe since I think that was later on in the broadcast that we talked about that.
Sure.
So just maybe a quick refresher for those that didn't hear it because, well, they weren't there and it
Right,
didn't
right,
get
right,
recorded.
right. So it's just that there's a little mnemonic Pardes, and which means like garden. So for example, I live in Pardes Hana, which is the Garden of Hana, and it's the Pei Resh Dalet Samik, and it means it represents 4 levels of interpretation. The first being Pshat, which is simple, Remez, which is like Remez means like clues. So, for example, you played the game Clue, Who Done It, it's a Who Done It game. Well, in Israel we call it Remez. We don't call it Clue, we call it Remez over here because that's what it means. And then we have Drosh. So Drosh is like you take wheat and you rub it between your hands, and all the chaff flies away, and you're left with like the actual wheat kernel. That's Drosh. That's like getting into the text and sort of taking it apart and getting to the core. And then you have Sod, which is like the more mystical level of interpretation. And those are 4 levels. And the thing is that I'll just be honest, I'm on Peshat. That's the level I'm on. And
the second one, maybe the
well,
maybe just tipping on to the third.
Well, look, we have midrashes, we have commentaries and things where rabbis go into that stuff. But those things are complicated if you don't understand Hebrew, if you don't understand the Talmud, if you don't understand. There are a lot of things you have to understand, be familiar with the Gothic literature. Yeah. There's just a lot of stuff you have to understand. One thing I showed...
here...
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and here, I think for the most part, we're going to go with try and go with the plain interpretation. Maybe a little bit into the second interpretation we were talking about. Hints and clues.
I think if we can do well to understand the simple meaning of the text, I think we'll be doing well. Because so many people make a mistake in understanding the simple meaning. I don't know how many lectures in college I sat through where the teacher was expounding on the text of the Torah and didn't know what they were talking about. It's just because they don't read it carefully. You have to understand, Jews read the Bible very, very carefully. And I've got my commentary sitting here. I've got the Ramban's commentary. He goes on Genesis 1:1 and 1:2 and all that on pages and takes it apart for good reason. And that is because it's important to understand. It's something God gave to us. Let's
very important.
Let's go on to verse 2, and I'm having to read it from my book. I can't see it on the screen, so I'm going to read it from my book. Ve'aretz chayta tohu v'bohu v'choshek al pnei tachum v'ruach elokim merefet al pnei ha'mayim. So there it says, and the earth was astonishingly empty, some say tohu v'bohu, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God, or the wind of God, depending on how you translate it, was hovering upon the face of the waters. And Ruach, go ahead.
I was gonna say on the website that you got here, it says the earth being unformed and void, with darkness over the surface of the deep, and a wind from God sweeping over the water.
Right. Right, and that's the translation of Sepharia, and I don't know. I'm not entirely sure where they get their English translation from. Sepharia is a really nice site if you're looking for some material, like some commentaries. But I'll be honest with you, if you're not familiar with Jewish culture, some of this stuff won't make any sense to you, because we have like a whole culture around learning, and so you won't know who some of these people are. Like I mentioned the Ramban. The Ramban is a famous rabbi. He lived about 900 years ago.
Oh man, I'm lost when you mentioned any of these things.
Right, and you've got to slow me down.
Okay, over there.
And you've got to slow me down and let me know when you don't know something, because I will just keep moving on sometimes because.
Yeah. Well, I don't think me not knowing who a teacher is or an interpreter or whatever you want to call them is a big deal, and I don't think that should be a big deal to our audiences. Maybe they can go look them up if they can remember the name.
Well, the only reason I bring it up, is because if you went to Sepharia or read other Jewish commentaries, then you would probably be kind of confused because you don't understand certain things. Like, for example, Ramban, who I keep referring to,
Yeah.
a lot of times he starts off his commentary by responding to the commentary of Rashi. And if you don't understand the relationship between Rashi and Ramban, you might not understand some of the points that Ramban is making. So I'm just saying that it can get complicated very quickly, and
Oh yeah.
you can't come to it like going, what does this mean to me? That's not how reading the Torah works. It has to be, what is the text trying to say? What is the author, God, trying to tell me? That's really the more the attitude you have to come with it, is what is God trying to tell me? And that's Peshat. Peshat is really about, what is God trying to tell me? And so, what point is he trying to make? And one of the things I said last week about the Torah is, we have a saying from the Talmud, the Torah is written in the language of men. And that means that it's got to be understandable to everybody. Even to an ignoramus, it's got to be understand something. He's got to be able to understand an aspect of it. He can't just be. It's not written for the elites, right? It's not written for
because
scholars.
if it's not written for everybody, to have it just for the elites makes no sense.
I mean, that's throughout the Jewish scriptures. First off, the humanity does not start off with the Jewish people. It starts off with just people, and the Jewish people come out of the general populace, and we become a special priesthood to the world.
Yeah.
But the people we see, for example, when we get into the Exodus account, when we get to this to where God is telling Moses to go to Pharaoh and he'll tell him, this way now not only will Israel know that I am God, but Egypt will know. They will know that I'm God as well. And so he wants to also, part of this whole process, this miraculous exodus from Egypt, is not just for the Jewish nation to know that God exists, but for everybody to know that God exists. And that's why, because I don't know, have you ever wondered why God is doing all these things with the Egyptians? Why is he? And there are even Egyptians who he doesn't punish, right? There are Egyptians who could get out when they listen to God, right?
Yeah, I think some of the Egyptians left with the Hebrew people, the Jewish people, when they exited Egypt.
For sure, and those people ended up becoming Jews later on at Mount Sinai. They ended up converted. There was a massive conversion that went there. But even later on in the prophets, like the Book of Jonah, the Book of Jonah is a story about God saving Nineveh by sending His prophet.
Yeah.
If the Torah is only about, if God is only interested in Jewish people, then why save Nineveh? Well, because God isn't only interested in the Jewish people. He's interested in everybody. He wants to save everybody. So He sends His prophet to go and warn them.
You even see it with Abraham, with Sodom and Gomorrah.
Sure.
Abraham bargains for Sodom and Gomorrah. God's wanting to save them, but
This is actually one of the things where it's interesting, because this is one of the things where there's a little controversy about, who was more righteous, Abraham or Noah, or who was like a greater tzaddik, a greater righteous person, right? And they say Abraham. Why Abraham? Because when the flood happened with Noah, he doesn't really actively try to save anybody. But we see with Abraham that he does actively try to save people, and it's a very important difference between. Now the thing can be argued that now it does say in Genesis that he built the ark over a course of 120 years. Excuse me. And presumably, if you read that, you might think it's to broadcast the miracle. Excuse me. And Abraham, Noah does do that.
I was just thinking, it took him 120 years. Him trying to build this, battleship size vessel,
Right, but it's
practically by himself.
Jor-El built his spaceship for his son Kal-El and shot him off to Earth and saved his life, right? And that's sort of what Noah did, right? Noah built an ark and saved his family. So let's get back to the 1:2, and this whole verse here is also interesting, and it says, and the earth was tohu and bohu. So the Ramban understands from this tohu and bohu. What is tohu and bohu? Tohu means potential. The earth was in a potential state, and bohu, it was in a potential state, bohu, and then it went to an actual state, tohu, which describes the process of actually God making everything. And Hoshek, darkness is upon the face of the deep. Here, Hoshek is understood as, we usually understand as darkness. And in the next verse 3, I believe, where we have the separation of light and dark, it means darkness, just darkness. But here, it makes the argument that this is actually an invisible fire. And that's why they use the term darkness here. I got into that learning for a little bit. Yeah, it's like there's fire that exists that doesn't, I guess, that doesn't have any impurities. I think the light is created by impurities. And so the idea here was there were no impurities to burn off, and therefore the fire didn't give off any light, and so it was invisible. So what the Ramban ultimately wants to do here is he wants to say that the four elements of creation exist here: fire, earth, wind, and water. So the Hoshek is the fire. The deep tohum is a mixture of earth and water, and we see this in different places like the Psalms and different areas where we use the word tohum, and then we find out that we're talking about, for example, when the sea is split, they walk across with what was the tohu, which is the sort of a mixture. It's a deep water, but ultimately it's mixed in with like earth and stuff. So upon the face of the deep, tohum is the deep, but it's also earth and water, and the ruach is the wind, and and of course, and upon the let's see here, and upon the face of the water, right? So tohum represents sort of like earth, and you have spirit, you have wind, you have darkness, and then you have water, and those are the four elements. This is very popular amongst at this time because around this time, a little earlier, the Muslims had rediscovered the writings of Aristotle and the Greek thinkers, and so it was all the rage. And not to say that this stuff doesn't exist independent of that, but that there was really a desire, I think, in some ways to connect it with the four elements.
Or what were considered just the four elements now.
Right.
We have umpteen number of elements.
Well, I think better than elements, the four essences, like four forces. Even I've seen people with modern interpretations talk about like the four forces or the four primal forces of nature or whatever. Okay, and so this is the third verse, and the third verse. Let me get over to flip it over here. Vayomer Elokim Yehi Or V'Yehi Or. It says, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. So Vayomer is, and he said. Now this is going to be interesting. You see the very first letter of that word on the right? You see that? It's kind of a stick.
It's like it looks like not an apostrophe, an exclamation mark.
Kind of. Okay.
A little bit of a look.
If you look down to the left, the second to last word also has that letter. That's a vav, letter vav, and letter vav oftentimes means and. Okay, and he said, and God said. Sometimes you lose that because you don't have to say and all the time, but it also has another function. If you take that vav off and you start with the next letter to it, the yud, that makes this word future tense. It would mean he will say. So putting that vav is called a vav conversive, and what that means is that it takes a future tense word and makes it past tense.
Okay.
Right? I point this out because if you look down to the second to last word, vayhi, vayhi, if you didn't have vayhi, that vav on there, then you'd just be repeating the previous word, the third word, yehi. They're the same word. So
Yeah.
God says, "Let there be light." This is future tense, and he says, "Let there be light," and then it goes, "And there was light." Past tense is done. So here we have a move from future to past tense, right there in the text. And the thing that makes it past tense is just that vav. Otherwise, it's the same word. It'd be a future tense word. Here's a problem. There's a problem in the verse, and that is it says, "And he said." The problem is that in order for you to speak, you have to have a mouth, and you have to have a voice, right? But God, this is the Jewish understanding of God, is that God has no physical form whatsoever. He doesn't have a body. Every time you come across the use of body parts or anthropomorphisms in the text, you know that it's meant to be like allegorical. It's meant because human beings understand what you're trying to say here. If I said, "And God fliggle-flagged," right, you wouldn't know what the heck fliggle-flagged means, right? So we have to. So what we want to know is what's going on. So we have two problems here. The first problem is that God is speaking, and as far as we know, God doesn't speak. The second question is who's he speaking to? Since we know that the act of God speaking is not meant to be literal anyway, we have the understanding that it really just means, and I'll read this, that the word actually means more like desire. Like this is one interpretation of God. God desired something. He desired there for the light to be, and through God's desire, the light came to be. Is sort of the way that this is interpreted.
I could see that because God is a creative force at the same time.
Right.
Anything that He's God. He wants something. Bam! It's there.
Right. His will is the same as action. Yeah. His will is the same thing as action. But we see this in other places, like in 1 Samuel 20, verse 4, where it says, "Whatever your soul says, I shall do for you." And the word "says" there is actually understood not as actually speaking, but what you desire. And then we have, let's see here, we have another example. In Genesis 24:51, it says, "And similarly, and let her be a wife for your master's son, as Hashem has spoken." But if you go back and you look in the text, God never spoke. God never said that sort of thing. He never said, "Let this woman be a wife." It means that God desired. God desired a wife for him. So we have a couple of different examples for that, where when you use the word "saying," you're talking about more like you're talking about internally in your heart. You're saying it to yourself. In the sense that, like, how would you say that?
Inner dialogue.
Well, for example, and the captive.
You see the movies all the time.
Okay, let's see. She who says in her heart, "Only I and none but me." So, for example, if you're thinking, really like you're thinking in your head.
Yeah.
You don't say it out loud, but you're thinking. Just like Hannah when she goes to pray, right? She's speaking to herself, like she's just praying quietly while her lips are moving. Right, so she's speaking out her desires in her heart. So both problems are solved by that, by understanding that Vayomer doesn't necessarily mean literally always. And this is an important point because we're talking about Peshat. Peshat doesn't mean I'm going to translate the word and that is the meaning of that. That didn't tell us what the text means. It means what information was the author trying to communicate? The author was not trying to say God speaks like a human. It was just indicating that God wanted the light to come into existence. Verse 4, Vayer Elokim et Haor ki tov. So God saw that the light was good. So we have this phrase ki tov. It comes up other places. It doesn't appear on the second day. It appears twice, I believe, on the sixth day. And ki tov is like God saying, is according to the Ramban, when God says, and it's good, he's established it permanently. That's a permanent establishment of it. Prior to that, if you notice when God created the heavens and the earth, he didn't say, it's good. He hasn't said that yet because everything was still in a state of potential. So he didn't establish it in that form forever. He was still using it to start making things. So now he's formed. So one other thing I want to go back to is the phrase "let there be" is a word for making something. It seems here to be you could say it's creating through separating, creating through by making things distinct. So God, and, God says later on that God separated between the light and the darkness. He called the darkness night and called the light day. So here we're going to get into in the next verses. How do we have a concept of time when there's no sun and moon and stars up right now?
I can see God actually speaking,
Mm-hmm.
at the same time, as well as the inner desire. Because he might not have a mouth like us, but doesn't mean he can't necessarily speak somehow. He's God, right? Nothing's
Well, we know from the burning bush and we know from later on that God can create a voice. God can communicate for sure. Yeah. And all it means when God is saying things, it just means he's communicating. And here there's nobody to communicate with, so we're just being let in on what was happening in the creation process, where God is bringing things into existence by, you say his words, but you can also say by his desire. It was his desire that created everything. Which makes you wonder, well, why did God desire to create things to begin with? There's a different form of desire. Why create anything to begin with? And so we have a 18th century Jewish sage named the Ramchal, Rabbi Chaim Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, and his answer to this question, and he's this is based on the Talmud and other sources that says that the reason God created the world is because he wanted to give a gift. And this is the language that he's using. God's a gift giver. And he wanted to give a gift. And the most perfect gift God can give is of himself. But he wanted to give the gift to someone who could appreciate it. So an angel can't appreciate God's gift because an angel is like a robot. It's programmed to do whatever God says. So
or close to it.
Close to it, right? But so God created human beings, but he created us flawed. But it's our flaw that gives us the ability to accept God's gift. And that flaw is free will. We have free will, and we can either choose to accept or to reject God. And that is what free will is, essentially. That's the most basic, essential aspect of free will that exists in the world, is the ability to reject or accept God. And
that I can definitely agree with.
It's not hard.
Although a lot of people, being a Christian, I can definitely say that's the most basic part of free will.
It is.
Accept or,
Well, the question is, otherwise, why did God create everything? Like, it's not like God was bored. It's not like he didn't have anything to do. It's those are things those are imperfections that don't apply to God. So that's why creation itself is an act of chesed, an act of kindness. But now the reason he also had to give us free will was because, have you ever known somebody who's always being like, people are always like helping them out? And what can happen sometimes with that is that those people can get to a point where they hate the person who helps them. They can hate it because they don't feel like they earned it. And by having the struggle of free will, we actually have the ability to feel that we've earned whatever the gift that God has given us. And God is giving it to us because we've earned it. We've done something to deserve it. And I use deserve in quotation marks, but so I think that's a very interesting a notion about why God created them. And for me, that's always rung the most true. of why God created it. God created it so we get to know Him, and it puts a lot of things in life in perspective. I think. You know, like you know, what am I doing? And this is why when I was in yeshiva, it's like Jewish seminary, but it's for regular people. You don't have to become like a rabbi to go there. It's just we're very big on education. So, you know, so you learn. I got two different chavrutas, two learning partners I learn with during the week, and the point is that we're supposed to be striving to understand God to the best of our ability. So in yeshiva, what we would say is, when we were feeling a little fatigued with learning, they're like, well, what else are you going to do, right? What else are you going to do that's worthwhile? And so it was sort of a way of us sort of refocusing our attention and minds and realizing that we could go off and do something that's sort of, you know, wasting time, or we could focus on learning. Not to say that you can't take breaks and you can't relax and pursue entertainment. Sometimes your mind just needs that kind of break. But the question is are you having so much free time and enjoyment that now you're not learning at all? Then that's a problem. And so that's what you want to address.
Yeah. You know, there's two scriptures. I think they're both in Old Testament. You know, come let us reason together. And then, you know, study to show
Isaiah,
yourself approved.
Say that again. What was the last one?
Study to show yourself approved.
I'm not sure where that one's from.
Yeah. Well, like one of them could be from the New Testament.
Well, the first one is from Isaiah, I think.
God doesn't want us to be dumb. God doesn't want us to take anything on face value, or very little on face value.
Yeah, well,
he wants us to use our brain. He gave us a brain. Use it.
Well, it's how do we connect with God? Do we connect to God with our arms and our legs? No. Do we connect to God with, you know, just about anything else in this world? No. We connect to God. What we connect to God is like spiritually and mentally, and those are the ways that we connect to God. Emotionally, sure. And also the 5 books of Moses, the first 5 books of the Bible we call the Torah. Torah itself means teaching, and it comes from the same root as Mora, teacher, and Hora, parent. They all share the same root that means teaching, right? And so a Torah is the document of teaching, which is interesting because it teaches different things. It teaches laws, how to conduct yourself, right? Ethics. Mm-hmm. It teaches you also how to interact with your neighbor.
Morality.
Right? Morality. It teaches you morality. It teaches you the ways to think about God, and it teaches you just good life lessons. There's a lot of things that the Torah teaches you.